Welcome to How's That Working For You, a podcast for the therapy curious. I'm your host, Dr. Zoe Krupka. It's a nightmare scenario for most of us in this field. Being on the witness stand, cross-examined, and having your qualifications, expertise, and even your personal life laid bare in a courtroom. This was the position that social worker and grief counselor Greg Roberts was in 2007, when he was the final witness in the defense for Robert Farquharson, who was accused and eventually convicted of killing his 3 children on Father's Day in 2005 in Victoria, here in Australia. Robert was found guilty and sentenced to life in prison. As a witness for the defense, Greg, who was Robert Farquharson's counselor, was brutally cross-examined on his professional understanding of grief and trauma, on his qualifications, expertise, and even on his personal experience of bereavement. During this time and for years after, many articles were written about the case, most of which were critical of Greg and his responses in court. Helen Garner's best-selling book about the case, This House of Grief, also painted an extremely unfavorable picture of Greg, both personally and professionally. When I asked Greg to come in and be a guest on the podcast, I didn't expect him to say yes, and I especially didn't expect him to say such an enthusiastic yes. The reason I really wanted to speak to him, and the reason I'm so glad you get to hear from him as well, is because he has not only lived through this experience, but also really learned some valuable lessons from it, and is happy to share those learnings with us. You may be surprised by what those lessons are. As you know, if you've been listening to How's That Working For You for even a couple of episodes, the focus here is the gap between theory, training, and actual practice. And what Greg offers us today really addresses one of the biggest gaps for anyone working in mental health. And that's the gap between what we learn to do to prepare for court appearances in order to make them, if not stress-free, then at least helpful to our clients, and what being in court actually means. I think what Greg really teaches us here busts many of the myths about what it's like to be in an adversarial situation in court, and how we can understand how to maintain our integrity, the integrity of the relationships we have with our clients, and the integrity of our professions when we're in an environment where the intention is adversarial. Really, I'm asking him how we prepare for a potentially public scenario where it's almost impossible to do a good job. Hello.
Hello, Zoe.
So can we start with you saying a little bit about, who you are, what you do, a bit about your practice for us?
Yeah, happy to. It's always probably different on each day what comes forward. So the primary part of my work is around grief, loss and bereavement work, including some work around trauma. And that's been the case for the last 25 years, so since about 2001. And I've worked across not-for-profit organisations, private practice, and government organisations. And so I do a mix of counselling and therapy, supervision of other practitioners, and then some training and education. So I have what I feel is a nice balance for me around that, and I'm now back in private practice and working across those 3 areas.
So heaps of kind of experiences of working with grief and loss and trauma from, I suppose, different entry points.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, quite a few different entry points. So my entry point into the field was really working with bereaved parents. So I worked with what was then called SIDS and Kids Victoria, which is now Red Nose nationally.
Yeah.
and worked there for about 8 years, as well as, so I was part-time, so I also balanced, after a few years, a bit of private practice I started. Then I've also worked with suicide, bereavement, a lot of sudden unexpected deaths has been part of my work, but I've also worked in palliative care. And prior to grief and bereavement, I worked in sort of aged care, disability, men's health. So a few other areas are mixed in there as well.
I mean, one of the things I just want to ask you up front, and is something I'm really kind of curious about, and I'm curious about it because, you know, my mother was a bereavement counsellor. I've done lots of grief and loss work, but I wonder what you think is the thing we get so wrong about grief. Like, what's the thing we miss the most?
I think for me, currently, and probably evolving over time, and I feel like as I get older and practice more, I get more passionate about this idea that, if I was to put it simply, that grief is functional. I'm never quite happy with the word functional. It's like I want it to be...
It's a bit mechanistic or something.
Right.
Yeah.
I want it to be something else, but it's the idea that grief is not something that we need to fix or make better. That actually grief, and for each of us individually, it has some wisdom. Like, it's actually taking our attention towards sort of stopping for a while and paying attention to what's significant to us, and then being able to sort of live forward from there and adjust and change. So to me, to not have grief is problematic, but we live in a society that has a tendency to say, oh, grief's uncomfortable and it's unpleasant, which it is. So how do we minimise or reduce the effect? And I guess I'm sharing that because I see that as a key problem across society and people I see as well. Like, first sessions with people I see for counselling, just a bit of validation and normalisation, and it might sound so simple, but people will say, I feel like a weight's lifted, because they've been living feeling like, not only am I grieving, but now I'm going crazy, I'm having all these weird thoughts, I'm having all these weird experiences, my body's doing things that I don't understand. Am I sick? Once they hear that it's all within the realm of what you might expect, they can then sort of be with their grief experience rather than an added layer. So I guess that's a roundabout way of answering the question.
Oh, no, that's a very comprehensive way of answering the question. And one of the things I'm thinking as you say that is that that's actually would really turn a lot of how we see grief, you know, very publicly or colloquially on its head.
Yes.
And it feels like it relates to, you know, why I wanted you here today, because that's kind of another place where there's a fundamental kind of misunderstanding about what our job is. And that's a misunderstanding of, you know, what we do when we get into a courtroom, in a way.
Yes.
Which kind of, you know, reduces our work to some kind of mythological forensic science or... So I wanted to ask you, you know, you had such a significant and public and awful and ultimately growthful experience, it sounds like, of being called into court to speak about your client. Are you able to talk a bit about that experience and how it was for you?
Yeah, it was like, and even now, as I talk about it, the effects of that are still sort of noticeable, you know, in a way. And it's particularly partly the strength of what comes with that sort of experience, as far as the strength of the emotions, the sort of psychological sort of grappling with things, that is all part of that. So it actually relates in some ways to what I was just saying, interestingly. So without sort of going into the circumstances too much for the person who was involved, it was a case where children had died, and there was a court case around a parent who was there at the time that the children died. And I was asked to come in as a witness, as an expert witness. And I was called in by the defence to do that. And specifically what they were wanting, because it was part of this particular case. And I know, because it was quite public, that people hearing this will probably, work out what case it was.
Yeah.
And so I'm not, I don't need to shy away from that necessarily. But for me, I was called in because there was a lot of conjecture around the behaviour of the parent immediately after the children died.
Is this normal? Is this what you would expect? Yeah.
Yeah, the way they behaved, is that normal? And people were sort of having conjecture around, this was strange. But again, coming from a perspective of perhaps not understanding grief or trauma from the general community, and even within the police and the legal realms. So it was thought that it would be useful, given I had worked with a lot of bereaved parents. And the program I was working in Geelong at the time was a little different and unique at the time in Australia, in that while we worked with SIDS and kids, which focused around sudden unexpected deaths of children, our program in Geelong was any sudden unexpected death where the child was up to the age of 18. So it meant that I had supported and worked with families after motor vehicle accidents, suicides, traumatic deaths, workplace accidents, those sorts of things.
So you'd seen a lot of different, and from the outside of the profession, strange parental reactions.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
The other unique part was that we were co-located at Geelong Hospital, and part of the deal they gave us offices to work from was that they could call on us. So there was myself and a colleague who worked in the program at the time, and we would regularly get called to the emergency department. SIDS and Kids at the time had a 24-hour line where we would respond to a sudden death and speak to police, medical staff. So sometimes we had directly seen those very early reactions and responses in people in the hospital environment. So all of that came together to be, we just need you to come in and, from your experience, just let us know what's within the realms of normal, and when we describe how this person behaved, do you consider it within the realms of a normal reaction and response?
Yes.
So I think part of the, thinking about me talking to you around this, straight away what comes is, I think back and I think, well, that sounds straightforward enough.
And
in a way.
And when you say that, lots of people working in the field would think that's straightforward. I can do that.
Mm-hmm.
I can answer that question.
I've got some knowledge. I've had some experience.
I'll be fine.
I know the literature around grief and trauma. I can just, speak to that. The difficulty, I think, to understand is that our legal system is an adversarial system.
Yeah.
So I was called by the defence, but of course the prosecution, part of their job is to weigh up, is there anything else here? is this actually accurate? So to challenge anything that anyone is going to say.
By any means necessary,
yes,
really. Yeah.
That's right, really, to put across their case and to try and put that forward in as strong a way as possible for, in this case, the jury to be able to, hear different sides. But it is, the experience itself for me was going in thinking, okay, I know there'll be the prosecution. I had some training, so SIDS and Kids were really supportive at the time with this particular circumstance, and others we'd been involved in. So legal advice had been sought. I'd been able to speak to some legal people. I was offered to do some training about appearing as an expert witness with a practitioner from WA, Phil Watts, I think his name was. And that was really useful, so I felt like...
You had the expertise, you had what lots of people don't have as well. You had the support of your organisation and you had supportive preparation.
Yeah.
So what you were feeling like,
I wasn't
thrilled.
I wasn't going in feeling like, this will be a breeze. I was anxious because it was an unknown. I'd been in court before, but not for a trial of that nature. And so understandably was nervous. And so I also really, like you said, prepared, put a lot of work into, okay, what I'm going to share, where is the evidence for this? What's the current evidence for this? Can I reference that evidence if I need to on the spot?
Yeah. How do you know that?
Yes.
Yeah.
So a lot of preparation, which all had a lot of energy to it, a lot of anxiety. And I guess ultimately the experience for me was, in spite of all that preparation, also waiting for the feeling, and I'm using this word deliberately because it's sort of, I'm noticing it's coming forward, having the feeling of being trapped and having something of what I'd said either be manipulated or completely negated by the method of trapping me with something.
Yeah. I mean, that classic, I suppose, what you see in, what we would think about as a kind of an American courtroom drama. You say some part of your story that's kind of meaningless, almost, is seized upon, expanded. I'm sure people who understand rhetoric and argument in the philosophy sector could name what that is. But when we first talked about this, you talked about that sense that it was actually impossible to say something clear enough, concise enough, not to have it used and distorted.
And all of that was shared in the training that I'd done. That, excuse me, that there would be some of the strategies used were shared and talked about. And what I liked about the training is it did leave me with that feeling, it left me with some anxiety, but it was useful to know, was that idea that it's highly likely. And I can still remember the description of Phil Watts of saying, it's highly likely at some point you'll have the experience of not realising that you've just walked through a gate and you hear the gate slamming behind you.
Awful.
And that's pretty much summed up what I actually experienced.
And I like the connection that you make to grief in a way, to our distortions around grief, that, the expectation that I should be able to get well, get better, leave this behind. Sort of there's some kind of similarity of I should be able to come into this environment and do a good job, that I can do it, that the preparation will help me do it.
Yeah.
And you're kind of saying the preparation helped me know what was happening, but not escape it.
But yes, not escape it. And I think some important things are that even with all the training, there was something in me that felt the importance of, and I know we talked about this in approaching this session, that something in me felt the importance of being authentic, but also to just be clear and be honest. And I still feel that, but after that experience, I think it's important to understand that even though you might be completely honest with your opinion or your perspective, that can actually be taken and distorted in a way that can have it being heard as not truthful.
Yes. I mean, and that was kind of my experience following what was happening, was that the distortion was really around discrediting you. And that the distortion was really, what you're saying now and what I'm hearing now is, okay, I was called in to basically assess whether these responses that my client had fit with them in the realm of the normal response, which are always weird to the deaths of children. Yes. You say yes. The distortion, as I read it, was really that you were somehow swayed by your client, which is such a common distortion for counselors, isn't it? That we're stupidly empathic, that we believe everybody, that we don't have very good training.
Open-hearted do-gooders.
Yes, and easily duped. Yeah,
that's right.
Yeah, which is so that's so fascinating to me, because when you look kind of at what you said, it is, is this normal? Yes, it is. This is what we see. And yet that narrative was spun about, you again being swayed.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And again, misconceptions around grief. Like I knew, because the person on trial was also my client and had been.
For some time.
For some time.
Yeah.
Yeah. And that sort of a death or loss experience, for us, it wasn't uncommon to be offering weekly sessions for a period of time that then might become fortnightly, but quite regular contact and support, because the nature of our service at the time was counselling and therapy, but also broader sort of psychosocial supports to the extended family, navigating systems. And so there was a lot of contact hours. And I remember that coming up through the prosecution of them saying, what, you've spent all these hours with this client and, what are you doing? Why are they not, they were virtually saying, why is this person not better?
Oh, yeah.
You've had so many sessions, like, are you ineffectual as a counsellor because you've offered so many sessions and nothing's better?
So the distortion, of how counseling and psychotherapy works, like we have the distortion about grief. I think it felt to me, and I'm not sure if it's like this for you too, that there was a distortion around that we take sides, that people that we help and support are people that we champion, which I always think is such garbage, because you work with people who do terrible things, you work with, a whole variety of experience. You probably know more, as much as the police officers in that room about the terrible things people do, and yet the distortion is that you're this lovely person who only thinks the best of people.
Everybody.
Yeah.
Absolutely everybody.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Which,
I think hearing you say that, it's a key part that has stuck with me about that experience, around that aspect of being sort of like the gate slamming shut was what I didn't know was the end, but it became the end of the prosecution speaking to me, was them asking a question which I was prepared for, the question, but I wasn't prepared for the question and then the gate to be slammed before I could say even a few words more.
the next part of your sentence. Yeah.
And that was around the fact that I was a bereaved parent and that I'd had a child that had died.
Case closed.
And it was just put as, is it true or is it not true? And please just answer with yes or no that you have experienced the death of a child yourself. And when I said yes, it was an instant closing down. Like, there was no option to even say anything more. And I remember at the time the publicly raising that I was a bereaved parent didn't upset me, but what upset me was straight away the feeling of, so if I'm a bereaved parent, do you not think that actually if I thought that someone had killed their own children, that I wouldn't be actually supportive of that? Like, what sort of weird distortion is that? Like, I could see how they'd used it, but it was like, to me, it was like, that logically doesn't make sense, but I can see what you've done, and you've done it incredibly effectively to exactly paint me in that light of, you're a bereaved parent, so of course you're going to be supportive of this person and say all the things that support them that have nothing to do with the truth.
I remember thinking at the time, you know, because there were so many, you know, articles critical of you. And I remember thinking, as, you know, as someone who, you know, I lost my brother as a child, so my parents lost a child, who's worked with lots of people who've lost children, lost siblings. How? Like, that is really, but you're really talking about, I think, the sense that, you know, like with the expectation of grief, that this should be, you know, over, and that, you know, reactions for any extended period of time are pathological, that you're in a space where there is an actual built-in distortion or misunderstanding about how, you know, what empathy is, or what distorts our understanding of what's actually happening.
Yeah, definitely.
The things that make you actually more trustworthy in your assessments are in that space the things that make you the least trustworthy.
Yes. And I do remember the defence barrister speaking to me beforehand, and at the time I had just made a start on my PhD. So my background was social work and then moving into counselling and therapy. And so I remember part of that, and some of the people listening to this will probably relate, that, you know, if you're a psychotherapist, or, you know, you're not, even psychologists in those settings often have the same experience. Perhaps if you're a psychiatrist, the court will hold you in a slightly different way, but there'll still be that element of, you know, one, and it is about sides, like one side, their job will be to discredit you. And that's their role, that's their job, is to discredit you. But far easier in amongst what we're saying of this, space where you need to be able to bring empathy and connectedness to other human beings, that on a hierarchy, there's a place for you. And I remember the defence barrister saying, "Oh, it's such a shame that you haven't finished your PhD." Because if we could refer to you as Dr. Greg Roberts, it would make a difference.
Oh, that's so good to hear, because, you know, on my one experience of being cross-examined, I remember the prosecutor so clearly saying to me, "It is Ms. Krupka, isn't it? It's not Dr. Krupka." And, you know, and there is a part of me that thinks, oh, yes, I can wear that PhD now like a bit of a cloak, which is, you know, of course, ridiculous, because I don't know about you, but my PhD, yes, I'm glad I have it. It was interesting to do, but I'm not sure whether it would have given me any more real credibility in that courtroom.
Well, no, and I think also it wouldn't have changed my
Your
perspective
assessment.
or assessment of things. But that that also struck me of how part of that legal system, it's also built on status and who is listened to. And I'm sure, I know from conversations, I'm sure he would be fine with me sharing this, that later on in this case, Dr. Rob Gordon, who's fairly well known in the field of trauma, was called as an expert witness. And he and I had a couple of conversations, and in one conversation, Rob said to me, he said, "Oh, it's really interesting that, you know, because I'm Dr. Rob Gordon, you know, like, I can provide my own perspective." And his description was consistent with mine around reactions, but had his own language around it as a psychologist. But I remember him saying to me, he said, "It's so interesting because actually I haven't had the direct experience of going into a hospital, into an emergency department and witnessing directly people's early reactions. I usually see people sometime after the traumatic incident. So in actual fact, you're really well placed to give evidence and a really good description of whether this is in the realms of normal." But we talked about that, you know, that whole hierarchy and status and perception of who is the best expert.
And how that actually takes precedence over genuine evidence.
That's right, yeah.
One of the things I was really surprised about this, but in retrospect, I shouldn't be surprised about this, was that, you know, when we talked, when we had our first conversation, you talked about people in our field approaching you now for advice and counsel, which of course makes perfect sense. I would be very, you know, that would be very useful to speak to you about that. How do you support them? Like, what do you say to people? Because you've said to me, basically, great to be prepared, didn't help me do a better job. Like, what would you say to people?
I think some of the key things for me are some of what I've already said, like really important to think about your role. Like, I look back now and think, even though I was well placed to be a witness in that case, the fact that I was also the counsellor of the person on trial, looking back, I go, okay, that sort of set me up to be in a compromising situation of both the role. I'd been called as an expert witness, but once I was on the stand,
you were the counsellor.
You can be asked anything that feels relevant. So yes, the prosecution came to me more from inquiring about my counselling role. So that would be one thing I'd think about, like consider what role are you being asked to take if you're called into a court situation, and clarify that as much as you can. But I would say, even in my case, like, it is preparing it as best you can, but also be prepared for that idea I shared, that, you know, what you have to say is going to be, there are going to be attempts to discredit and actually sort of tear apart what you're saying, even though you quite deeply might know it to be true, and that you're sharing that as honestly and as authentically as you can, to not go in with an expectation that everybody in the courtroom is going to go, "Thanks very much, Greg. That was really interesting and useful. I'm glad the jury has heard your perspective." Because you have the adversarial system. There is one side that's going to be really kind and supportive of you. Whoever calls you as the witness will usually do that. They will support you, offer all of that. And yet there will be the other side who, and it's understanding it's not personal. That's the other thing I had to realise, that they're not people who are personally out to get you or discredit you, but it's their job. Their job within that system is to challenge, question, potentially discredit anything that you're saying, because they have a counter argument to the people who have called you as a witness. So it's almost like, be mindful and be prepared that it's going to be rough, it's going to be difficult, but also be really clear about your purpose, your role in that situation. And then in behind that, I think, is your sense of integrity, of like, can you be really clear about what's important to you, and can you appear in a way and offer information in a way that your integrity stays intact for you.
That you're not measuring it by whether they get it or not, or
Yeah.
they understand it or not.
Yeah.
And one of the things you said to me when we first spoke that really, really struck me was that they're going to be better at it than you are.
Mm-hmm.
That, you know, a good prosecutor is going to entrap you, distort what you say. That's what they do. They've been practicing it for a long time. If it's a high-profile case where the stakes are high, particularly, it's going to be someone who does this every day.
Yes.
You're not that person. In
No.
fact, we
No.
spent our lives practicing the opposite form of communication.
Exactly.
So, you know, do you say that to people? Like, it's not going to be possible. You're not going to walk out of there probably feeling good about what happened. You can only feel good about, you know, as you say, kind of maintaining your genuineness and integrity in terms of your role. And
yeah, I think so. And just hearing what you were saying, I know there's part of me that wants to emphasise, I think it's possible that it's both the experience of, I did what I intended to do, and I feel good that I actually stayed clear about what I shared. And I feel like that also got distorted so much, I'm not sure if that was heard by everybody or understood by everybody. But I know as best I can, it's almost back to that thing of actually, I gave this the best I could. I feel like, I know it's a little sidestep, but some things from the training just sort of pop back up around other things that I say to people if they come to me and sort of like, how do you prepare for this? And around maintaining your integrity, this feels important. And it's a simple idea that the person who offered the training said, understand what your rights are in the witness box as well. That
right.
You may feel like you have no power, but actually there are little points of power that you have, such as you can pause for as long as you like.
oh, wow.
You can just...
I wish I'd known that.
You can just stop. And even if you want to, you could say, okay, I just need a moment to take that question in and then just stop. He also added, if you feel uncomfortable about that, there will usually always be a jug of water and a glass. So you don't even have to speak. You can stop and just say, I'm just going to get myself some water, pour some more water in the glass, pick up the glass, do it really slowly, and allow yourself to sort of reconnect to whatever's been asked or whatever's been said. And he emphasised, take out the urgency to respond, that they will ask you questions in a way that often have a charge to them where they're looking for you to react. So slow down to notice your reaction, and then you're more likely to be able to respond rather than react to what they're asking you. And that is acceptable court behaviour, but a lot of people are not aware of that fact.
Yeah, that's really, that kind of adversarial communication so relies on feeling that you have to be responsive, immediately responsive. And we're also really trained to be responsive.
Yes.
Aren't we? Like, that's a terrible vulnerability for us in the courtroom, I think.
Yes, that you want to be able to respond to what's being asked. And you're aware of the pressure of the situation. I don't know what you found, but that's what I found. Like, you're very aware that there are all these people around who are waiting for your response. So that can bring that feeling of like, I've got to say something. Whereas I think out of the training, that was probably the most useful, that I feel like somewhat helped me keep my integrity intact, because I did take those pauses and I was able to sort of just have a moment to sort of take in what they were saying, in a few cases realise where they were trying to lead me, and just answer in a way that allowed me to feel better about myself. And that's why, like, what happened at the end felt like such a jolt, because it was a circumstance that like I said, I was sort of ready for that question, but it was like not at that point, and not for that to be the full stop.
I like, it feels so helpful what you're saying, like, and so not generally in the way that we're trained.
No.
So that kind of be very clear, in what capacity am I on the stand? Who am I? In this case, the mix of being both counsellor and expert witness was not working.
Immediately. And even if you do it, I think I could have understood better back then of what that would mean. And so I think that's why it's important to have that clarity, so that you can at least contemplate, okay, what sort of position does that put me in? And it's almost like an acceptance of, okay, that compromises me. So yes, I'm still being asked to do this, but I'm doing it already in a compromised sort of situation. So I need to be prepared to sort of experience some of that. I think it's, as we're talking, it's like anything you can do to sort of feel like you have an awareness or an acceptance that it sounds terrible, but that it's not going to be a great or an easy experience. To almost go in with that attitude is probably more helpful for you.
That really speaks to me with my experience, where people that I supervise, is that expectation of being able to master it, as if it's an American courtroom drama, is a terrible setup. So I love that sort of, how am I coming in, lower my expectations, expect to have what I say distorted, expect the door to shut behind you, without the music, like there might be in a movie, but it feels like that. And then I love that you talk about the process, because rather than just trying to master the content, that there was something for you where you felt a greater sense of integrity because you were able to take your time.
Yes. Yeah. And I know people often get advised this, so I did have some notes with me, which were basically my summary of some notes around trauma theories, those sorts of things, because I thought in the pressure of the moment, there are so many aspects to that I may not be able to recall. And so I wanted that there. And that was also part of the training I had as another slowing down process. Like, have your notes there, even if you're not going to just stand there and read off them. Have them there, so another strategy can be at some point to say, oh, that is an interesting question. I just need a moment to look at my notes. So you can take your focus away from the situation you're in and read. And both the information you have may be useful, but at least it again allows you to reconnect to, why am I here? What do I know? What do I want to say? Yeah.
Then the thing I like about that too is it feels like in an environment where your professionalism is going to be discredited, and in fact your profession is fundamentally misunderstood.
Yes.
That you maintain what you would do in your profession, like what you might do with a client, what I might do with a client. I'm not sure. I don't remember the protocol for that. I
Yes.
will check that and get
Yes.
back to you, rather than the courtroom protocol, which is have everything on the tip of your tongue, be incredibly responsive, enormously articulate, all the things which are not requirements for our profession and in fact
Yes.
often not helpful.
And can include the person questioning you saying things like if you do pause for a while, perhaps adding in little hooks like, sure, that's fine if you're not quite sure about your answer. You know, so again, it's that whole sort of drama of the courtroom. Like I said, you know, it's people's roles, it's the legal system we have, but it's adversarial, and there is a level of drama around that.
And you're not going into the drama.
Yes.
Yeah, I'm not in the drama.
That's right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
What can I do to remind myself that I am not in this drama?
That's right.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
Oh.
But it is incredibly difficult.
Yeah.
Incredibly difficult.
Yeah. And so why it's so helpful, the kind of direction that you've given us today. I feel very soothed by it, actually. Yeah, very particularly because you've come through this without a kind of a sense of, next time I'm not going to miss those gates. I mean, not that you don't have any kind of plans of what you do, but I think that's so helpful for us to go, okay, this can and will happen, and I can maintain my sense of integrity personally and professionally in that space.
Absolutely.
Oh.
The other thing I found helpful in the training, which is actually a counselling therapy skill that is useful in the courtroom, is the ask the person to say it back. And I think in a different setting, I sort of think that that's where the training was useful, because that was talked about in the training as well.
Can you say that again? Can you ask me that question again?
That it's permissible. Like,
Great.
Don't feel that because they say a question very forcefully and directly, and it might sound clear, another way to sort of get some clarity but also clarify things for yourself is just to say, oh, I'm sorry, it would help me if you could just say that again. And often they will say it slightly differently, like there might be just one or two words. And so you can sort of notice that, which allows you to sort of ground yourself a bit.
Yeah.
But also maybe sort of hear a nuance in what they're actually asking. That the first time had a direct, what sounded like a direct clarity.
And now they're not, they're thinking again about what they said.
Yes. Yeah.
Oh, so that like the vision that I have that of what you're talking about is that the space is very restrictive, and that what you're doing is making space, making some space for yourself, making time. I want this, I need this, and how that kind of is reassuring in that moment, or reminds you, oh, I am Greg Roberts, I'm here in this capacity, and this is what I'm doing.
Yes.
Oh.
And as you're saying that, it's like it's for people, as we're saying, for people to understand that that's there, but it's in the background feeling of tension and anxiety that's in you as well. So it's almost like these things that I'm talking about, like asking the person to say it back. It does sort of slow things and it calms things a bit, but it doesn't take away the...
It's going to hurt.
That's right.
That's what it will hurt.
Yeah, and take a lot of energy.
And that's what that feels like it's connected to kind of full circle to where we started with, like that you're saying to people who come in both in the capacity of, bereavement and a kind of preparation for court, this will hurt. That's not optional. Then we'll work
from there.
We'll work from there.
That's right. Let's just put aside any idea that you can prepare and this will go well.
Yeah.
And you're how are you going to measure it going well? That measure needs to be from you, or either through supervision afterwards, but not
here
in that setting.
No. Oh, thank you so much. That's been so helpful.
Important conversation.
I feel so helped by it. Thank you so much, Greg.
Thank you, Zoe.
This podcast is brought to you by the Karen Miller Institute. Karen Miller is founded on the unceded lands of the Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nation. We pay our respects to their elders, past and present, and acknowledge their deep and enduring connection to land, waters, and community. The legacies of colonization and the ongoing effects of institutional racism have enduring impacts on the mental health and well-being of First Nations people, and we hold this continuing dispossession in our minds and hearts as we explore the question of how to improve our work in the mental health field. Karen Miller is founded on the unceded lands of the Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nation. We pay our respects to their elders, past and present, and acknowledge their deep and enduring connection to land, waters, and community. The legacies of colonization and the ongoing effects of institutional racism have enduring impacts on the mental health and well-being of First Nations people, and we hold this continuing dispossession in our minds and hearts as we explore the question of how to improve our work in the mental health field. Karen Miller is more than just a not-for-profit organization. It's a vibrant community of students, clients, staff, alumni, and generous donors. Our hearts beat for better mental health, which has driven us for over 60 years. At CMI, we believe in a dynamic interplay between training, research, and clinical practice. These three pillars form our triple helix, each strengthening and informing the other as a registered health promotion charity. We've been pioneers in counselling and psychotherapy in Australia, and our purpose is to enhance mental health through accessible psychological services and innovative professional education. That's where How's That Working For You comes in. This podcast is our way of sharing the extraordinary insights, anecdotes, and life lessons from the mental health field. We're pulling back the curtain to offer you a unique peek behind the scenes, aiming to deepen your understanding of this remarkable space. I'm a senior lecturer at CMI. I'm a feminist psychotherapist, supervisor, and researcher. I've worked in agencies and in private practice, and I've trained in a number of modalities, including emotion-focused therapy and existential psychotherapy, and I have a primary interest in anti-oppressive practice. Thank you for listening to How's That Working For You, a podcast for the therapy curious. This has been your host, Dr. Zoe Krupka. This podcast is a space for open conversations, but it's important to remember that what you're hearing are the personal experiences and thoughts of me and of our guests. While we're here to share insights, please don't take any of this as advice. We're all wonderfully unique, so if you have therapeutic concerns, it's best to chat with your healthcare professional. This podcast was brought to you by the Karen Miller Institute. For more information about our organization, the services we offer, and how to donate, visit our website at cmi.edu.au. You can find links and more information about each guest in our episode show notes. Find us on all major podcast platforms and stay tuned for more inspiring episodes.